because my job isn't just go lead product, develop strategy, and go get, build the right things. It's like get in the weeds and understand how this thing is built and how I personally can move the needle every day. So we used to be told all the time, we're the CEO of the product. Be the Steve Jobs of building things. What very specific, tangible product improvement have you personally championed and built or delivered? It's changed who I hire. It's changed the expectations I have. It's changed the velocity with which I think change should be happening, even once a new person is onboarded.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Technocratic podcast, where my guests and I share practical insights and wisdom about product and engineering so that you can jump into the top 1% of leadership. Today, our guest is Joel Hames, a longtime product leader in the EdTech space. Joel has built and led product teams across a number of different businesses, including Paper, Schoology, Subject, and more. He's held roles as product strategy leader, VP of product, chief product officer. Joel and I got to know each other just a little bit when we overlapped at an EdTech firm, and I was always impressed by how many balls Joel could juggle at the same time. It was an insane amount of work. And Joel always came through on everything. We're really excited to have him on the show. Welcome to the podcast, Joel.
Thank you, Bobby. I'm excited to be here and for the conversation we'll have.
Awesome. So you're in sunny California. I am somewhere in Sydney, Australia. I love the interconnectedness of the world these days. You can do so much on Zoom. It's fascinating. We're going to jump right into it, Joel. Obviously, you spent a long time in EdTech. I spent quite some time there in that industry as well. And product management in EdTech came about, I think, after some time that it had been happening in other industries. But anyway, how do you see product management having evolved and changed, I guess, in the last 10 years or so? Obviously, the pandemic changed it. I think to some degree AI is changing it. But just in general, in EdTech, and how product management teams operate, what they focus on and decide and prioritize things, and the building a product strategy and all that. How have you sort of seen it transform or evolve in the last 10 years?
It's a great question. When I first started my product journey, it was about 13 or 14 years ago. I'd spent a bunch of time in education, and I had a chance to come in as a senior product manager at an EdTech company. In that role at that time, and I think we saw that in a lot of companies in the early 2010s, the job was to help engineering develop a greater context and rationale for the things that they were building. I walked into a company that was very heavily sales-led and engineering-led, and the bridge between the two wasn't incredibly strong. So being able to identify things that were going to move the needle to build the business over the ensuing 1, 2, 3 years or more just wasn't being adequately done. So the job in the beginning was just develop relationships, understand the strategy of the company, and go execute and help communicate the value proposition, internal and external. Now, that's kind of at the heart of all of our jobs, still to today. But I think what I've seen in terms of the evolution of it is there was a point in the late 2010s, early 2020s that I would talk a lot about the Iron Triangle, and that's incredibly valuable. This is the collaboration. Maybe your listeners have heard it from it elsewhere. Between engineering design and product management, and there's different overlapping roles there. But what I am seeing today, and I'm seeing this broadly across industries, certainly in EdTech, is that the emphasis, the job remains understanding the company's strategy, developing a product strategy that aligns and moves that forward, and rallying the various disciplines to go and build. But the shift, I think the fundamental or practical shift I'm seeing is really towards a very practical execution-based role within product management itself.
Mm,
AI certainly had an impact on it. I think you mentioned that, but it's this idea that product managers for a while would be seen as the conductors of an orchestra. Now they
mm-hmm,
actually need to play instruments as well. They have to figure out how
mm-hmm.
to both serve as that liaison, but also
Yeah,
using AI tools, using a technical skill set, being well versed in SQL. There's an element to a lot of this that now produces tangible value that goes beyond just building
yeah.
the bridges and documenting where to go. And I think that's been a key shift.
Yeah, that is a massive shift. One thing I still notice in a lot of ed tech firms, at least where anywhere where I'm an investor personally, or where maybe I'm on a board or something like that, is a lot of ed tech firms still treat product like they're project managers, and that's been
Mhm.
one of my personal peeves. It irritates me greatly. Not project management should happen. It's in many organizations very important, but that's not the same thing as product management. In your opinion, what should a company do that's sort of like still stuck in that project mindset? How did they switch over to more of a product mindset?
At the end of the day, it's going to come down to outcomes. What's the outcome of the work? A
Mm,
project manager's outcome is that projects are done successfully. And you can find this in places where there might be a discrepancy in expectations from the highest levels of leadership down through the product chain. And that
right.
discrepancy ends up being, well, here are the things that we need to go move the needle.
Hmm.
To truly shift the conversation, someone who finds themselves stuck in that project management role needs to be, frankly, willing to go out on a limb, to maybe even say no, but more importantly, use evidence. Use an intense scrutiny, conversation closeness with the users of the product, a deep understanding of what the data is telling them, and go
Yeah.
and take ownership of an outcome 3, 6, 12 months down the line. Certainly
Hmm.
project manage it, but it's not just about
Hmm.
getting the thing done. It's about being able to state, well, by doing this, we drove this positive thing in the business that you might not have expected. And
Right.
I think a lot of businesses still have a major gap there. There's a lot of prescription about what to go do. There's a lack of follow-up measurement. Sometimes it's divorced from what the market needs. And someone
Hmm.
who's in a product role needs to recognize when they're stuck just producing projects, producing features, and shift over into just the experimentation and the rational basis for what to go do,
Hmm.
and push hard on leadership to say, I'm going to own outcomes that are much larger than one project.
Yeah, that's super smart. Yeah, thinking about it as what are the outcomes that you're driving? And I do think that people who are stuck in roles that are project but want to be in product, they need to advocate for themselves and push hard to kind of make changes happen. It usually doesn't fall into anybody's lap. No executive is just going to come to them and say, you know what? I mean, we were so wrong. Like this should be all about product and not project. Those are different disciplines. Nobody says that, so you have to kind of make your own change yourself at some level. Um,
Exactly.
the other thing I wanted to ask you about last 10 years of product management changes is I remember first getting introduced to product management back at 15, 20 years ago, whatever, and being fascinated by like the thought of developing a product strategy, a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year product strategy. And I've noticed that for some reason, product teams don't spend enough time on figuring out the product strategy. Maybe it's gone out of vogue in the people that I connect with the most. But what do you think the role is of product strategy in companies where maybe they're maybe it's even like product companies that are heavily just product led, even sometimes don't have like a real strategy that then especially in companies that are like maybe sales led or others, even tech enabled service companies, they never think about product strategy all that much. Is it just not that important? Is a business strategy enough to do the things you need to do? Do you need a product strategy? Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, one of the pieces of advice I give to folks who are looking to move along in their career, move up into leadership roles is first of all, I say strip away any title or effort around strategy. And ironically, it's not because strategy isn't important, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But I do find that what ends up happening is that our role, the role of product leadership, in whatever specific title it is to make bets on the future that are some of the most hard and difficult to measure bets possible. If I'm a sales leader, a revenue leader, then there's a relatively tight feedback cycle. I can know what territories or regions I'm moving into. I can know the resourcing I'm putting into it. Maybe marketing is a little difficult as well because you don't know the direct benefit of any particular thing you've marketed. Same thing happens in product strategy, though, and it's even harder. We're making bets 6, 12, 18, 24 months down the road. And because there's not a feedback cycle, we struggle often to identify those leading indicators that those bets are going to pay off. This concept of product strategy is a little bit of a dangerous place to go to say, I'm going to work on product strategy, because the business eventually looks at product strategists or any kind of strategist and will say, yeah, but what's the output? Like, what are you actually doing that's moving the needle? Well, I'm making bets for a year from now. Well, how do we know those bets are coming to fruition? When are we going to see the results? Well, we're going to see it a year from now. And it's really hard. And I'm talking mostly in the B2B SaaS space. There's a different answer in some of our consumer-focused companies. But anyway, the role of product strategy has to be able to bridge those near-term experiments and bets that you're making with some kind of semblance of what outcome you're expecting for the company, let's say 2 or 3 years down the road. Right. So don't just focus on strategy as a long-term lever of growth. A focus on strategy is a sequence of things where you can be very specific about what's happening tomorrow, next week, the week after, and then the next month that are going to be the early indicators that the bets you want to make are going to be successful. And I've really tried to incorporate that into any of the kind of mindset of the folks that work where I am now, that I advise and help out is stop worrying too much about 3 years from now, because you can't predict everything. You can have a vision and you can have a path to it, but figure out what you're doing tomorrow that gives you an anchor into practical outcomes that tell us the strategy is going to be of value. Then people will listen more and actually start to follow one.
That's really good. The other part of it is that strategy, you're sort of alluding to this, is that a product person can make the strategy, but executing on it and getting the results out of it depends on a lot of other stakeholders. How should a product person who's looking to get higher and higher in their leadership, how should they navigate the multi-stakeholder environment impacting their outcomes? Because oftentimes we talk about product being like the hub and spoke model. There's products like the glue to so many different organizations inside the broader company. And so there's nothing that product produces that isn't touched by somebody else in some way, and therefore the results are in part driven by other teams, like sales, for example. How should a product person navigate all of that? You can't just sit around and blame sales for lack of results or point the finger at yourself and be like, we stink at making product and stuff. How does a junior product person who's getting into the higher ranks get through something like that?
So I'll offer 2 practical thoughts on it. I think there are probably even more. The first one is, I think that while I wouldn't use the words you use, I actually do think a very self-critical analysis of the role of product in a company is the most important thing. I would argue, and I've seen this repeated over and over, an amazing product with a mediocre revenue team is going to be successful. An amazing revenue team with a mediocre product will never be successful. It's going to fail. So we have to have a true and deep belief that maybe this is a little bit bit of a broad brush, but that product solves all problems. An amazing product is going to move the needle. So that doesn't mean that an individual person is the one who's responsible for whether or not that product is successful. A true product-led company, this is an ethos that goes throughout everybody. Sales would understand that building a great product requires collaboration and communication, but standing up and taking that ownership and saying, personally, I can have opinions about the efficacy of driving opportunities through the pipeline, how well we're doing at top of funnel, What are our close rates? Do we have the right talent? But I could also very easily say, well, a product that's fantastic is going to drive interest and drive top of funnel. A product that demos well and has great references is going to move opportunities through the middle of the pipeline. And so with that, I have to kind of constantly ask, if there are inefficiencies, if there are breakdowns or problems, how can I put product at the center of solving that so that people understand I'm going to be a partner in that entire ecosystem? That's really kind of one major area that I think is important for anyone moving into this to keep in mind. I think the second thing is, too often historically, I've seen PMs who fall into a role that is like traffic cop. This is like a superset of the project manager stuff. It's that word, product managers can be the hub, but the reality is that some of those connections actually could still exist without the PM. And a PM who's thinking of themselves as, I'm going to rally a set of people, engineers, designers, my sales folks, my sales ops, my rev, whatever, right? All of these things, and I'm going to document, I'm going to communicate and do all of that. Like, there's value, and there is value, but at the end of the day, some of those things can be solved in other ways when the organization gets a lot of pressure and that pressure cooker is tight. The PM can all of a sudden find themselves not valued very much.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we overcome that? In every product leader, product manager, everyone I talk to now, I ask this question. And I ask, what very specific, tangible product improvement have you personally championed and built or delivered? And we all can do this. An example might be understanding what's happening in your operations team, your customer success team, where something in the onboarding flow is going wrong or where data is lacking. This is understanding what are the types of things that you might be able to solve now with AI, which can make any PM actually pretty competent at Python scripting. Get a few endpoints from your engineers, get some data, make sure that they understand what's going on, but actually own solving problems in a very material way. It's going to increase the relevance and the impact of your kind of traffic manager role or orchestral role, because people are going to see you in the weeds, and you have a testament to how, there's some percentage of my time where it's not just about having conversations with users, so important. It's not just about building a roadmap, so important. It's actually, I went and got this thing done. And there are dozens or hundreds of examples I could bring to the forefront where it wasn't an engineer and it wasn't a technical person in CS. It was actually the product person who said, I'm going to make a difference here. Use a tool that overlays guides and does data analytics and helps ease the onboarding process through a no-code option. Like, just find a way to do that, own that, deliver it, and be able to highlight how that increased satisfaction, increased conversion, increased these things. Like, that very tactical thing you can't lose. Even now as a chief product officer, I have a dozen things I'm doing on a daily basis that fall into this category that I just assume like they have to be part of my job, because my job isn't just go lead product, develop strategy, and go get, build the right things. It's like, get in the weeds and understand how this thing is built and how I personally can move the needle every day.
I like that. Personally delivering on some feature that it keeps you also close to the product and its problems and the problems of your customers and all that. One thing you said that piqued my interest here was that the example you gave of like a weak revenue team and a strong product and things like that. I want to just push back a little bit on that. What about these? As investors, a lot of times you're looking for like where not a lot of product or a company where you don't have to do a ton of work on the product, but you can really scale the revenue side of it really well. There's a famous kind of joke, I think, about Oracle and how Oracle hasn't innovated since the late 90s, early 2000s or something like that, and how it's just Oracle's sales team that has been through some tactics that aren't exactly the best tactics, I think, in the world, but they have built an enormous business on essentially this product that hasn't changed a lot for many, many years, maybe even decades. So what do you say to something like that? Because in that case, you now have like maybe you have a keep the lights on product and engineering team, but you're selling like gangbusters. Your growth is incredibly high. What about those scenarios?
Yeah, two thoughts. Number one is I don't know necessarily that I can confidently state it applies to Oracle, but in the spaces they're in, we could imagine a lot more innovation happening that might unlock more opportunities. That might have put them at the forefront of some things that we see some of the modern companies coming up and taking revenue, whether it's shared wallet because they're offering a better, more diversified suite. It's leveraging more efficient. Like there's a set of things that probably could actually help them accelerate a bit more. But let's even given that, I do think that there's this concept of when you have extreme product market fit, um, like that's kind of the first barrier. Like if you have extreme product market fit and you put an excellent sales team on it, of course, like the amplification of value is going to be there. And a lot of what Oracle does, that's just fundamentally been it. They hit that early on. They had a differentiated product offering, and we're able to build a significant amount of momentum there. So I would say also I don't know that saying what I said is necessarily a universal truth. There's a lot of nuance to it. But I do think anyone wanting to become a product leader at whatever level they are is if you ever adopt the attitude that we can be successful with an amazing sales team and a mediocre product, it's
That's the
just you're
wrong
just going to
attitude.
find it's just going to like flame out, and it's just not going to work. It's just going to be a
Mm,
job, and you're not going to find a great deal of success. So I think it's
mhm.
really about the personal ethos that you bring to the position. I think different companies might find the needle is it moved into like slightly different positions depending on that product market fit, and if there are competitive solutions and the time of year, the funding environment, the economic environment. There's a lot of factors there, but we just personally have to believe that it's always about having a better product.
Yep. The one thing that I've seen product leaders definitely struggle with is explaining the lag between the work that they do and then when the actual business impact happens. You build a product, maybe it takes 6 months for you to see any of the return on investment on that. How should a person who's looking to manage that end of things do better on that? Because we imagine, like, for example, your first time VP of product, you're sitting in your first ELT meeting, and you just released a brand new capability, and it's pretty
Mhm.
big. And then everybody wants to know, all right, what happened? And it's literally like you released it last Monday. Now it's the next Monday, and the CEO wants to know how much more revenue did we get on this? How do you
Yeah.
juggle that as a product leader?
Yeah. Uh, if I myself, I keep coming up with two thoughts, so I'll share both. I feel like the rule of three comes in at some point, so I'm probably going to do a threefer at some point. Okay, so the first thing is that um, we talk about risk taking and experimentation, and how is the environment built to support that? I've been in places where we talk about experimentation frameworks and we start thinking about the philosophy of it. Um, our success and the success to be able to like communicate what the difference of any individual thing is going to be is is going to be, I think, measured more favorably when we have tried a
Less.
dozen things this month and failed on nine of them. But
Right.
three of them actually proved to move the needle. It's easier to put that contrast up. If you're just doing one thing, you deliver one thing and then you wait for results, it's hard to describe the benefit when you don't have that contrasting failure to look at. So that's number one. It's just like it is probably the biggest and most important thing we have as product leaders is figuring out how to experiment faster? How do we bring POCs
Mhm.
to a selected group of folks? How do we like do something scrappy? I just recently, I mean, literally just recently on a Friday late afternoon, I sat with an engineer because we're trying to solve a problem for our English language learners that could require months and months of development. And because of AI tools, we jammed on a very narrow concept. He had it mocked up the next day, And by
Mm-hmm.
Monday, it was in the hands of my CS team to like vet the validity of it. You can imagine it as a way of highlighting text and getting an LLM to respond by simplifying the concepts and ideas for someone that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
understand the actual word. They could also translate it and have it read
That's
aloud. Like,
cool.
it's not the most complex thing, but it was targeted at this idea that there's this pain point in the market, and something that the team needed to be able to showcase not only like value, but like the fact that we care about this part of the market. And we ran an experiment, and it's not quite done. It needs work, but we got immediate feedback, and we actually were able to convince the CS team that this could be a material part of upsells and renewals. And it's proving to be that way. It's in almost every conversation now.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't tell you how much exact revenue it's driven since we did it, but the CS team will attest to it being a difference maker in their conversations. So that's kind of,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of that piece. I think the other is getting a company to move off of the idea that any individual feature is the thing that's going to drive revenue. There are exceptions, and there are cases where a feature suddenly opens the market. And in a direct-to-consumer option, that's certainly true. You can make a tweak to the onboarding flow, and your conversion rates can be higher. You can get more people subscribing. In a B2B environment, that's much less true. That hardly ever happens. So one of the approaches is that I've taken is kind of a simplified product planning tool. And really what it does is it looks at all revenue to date and chunks it into what is the thesis the company has based on evidence, anecdotal or quantitative, around feature families and how they drove value. So this isn't like that we built a course in our EdTech platform. It's
Mm-hmm.
that we have courses that meet a certain level of criteria generally, our course catalog. It's not that, like I mentioned earlier, it's not one feature for our support for newcomers and English language learner students. It's a set of things that represent an investment in that value proposition. So when we think about it in feature families, we can actually kind of retrospectively, imperfectly, but at least directionally right, say, well, of the current revenue we generate, here's the construction of it. Literally every dollar assigned into a feature family somehow.
Mm-hmm.
10 areas. It's not a big deal. Now, what is our thesis about what we're going to do over the next year or two that's going to drive the incremental value, the revenue that we're looking at? How are we going to reach our targets? What is the percentage distribution across those feature families?
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, now I can rally the company around like both the prioritization, but more importantly, how and why a feature as part of a feature family is going to help us reach that revenue target that we've allocated for that particular feature family. And this
Mm-hmm.
perspective, shared with the board, shared with the executive leadership, has changed the conversation around, those individual things. We don't think of one course moving the needle. Sure, one course build means 3 more school districts will sign on because it's the one they needed, but rather by investing in X number of courses over the next 6 months in this sales season, we expect to drive 20% of our 2025 revenue. And so, now we have a much better tuning of why we're building certain things and what the value of any individual thing contributes to.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool. I like that idea. I like this notion also of PMs, VPs of product, and so forth, actually writing down what they think the lag is going to be between the different releases that they do and the actual business impact of it all. Customer impact is another thing. Business impact is one factor. Let's figure out what we think is going to be that gap, and be very clear about it and say, yep, this is going to take 6 months before it does anything, or this is going to be a 1-day thing and all the customers are going to jump on, they're going to love it, and we'll get some amazing NPS bumps or something this month or whatever. I like the idea is actually spending a little bit of time thinking that through, rather than just release a thing and then negotiate it after the fact, the whole leading versus lagging indicator. So let's just map it out beforehand, and we'll probably over time get good at guessing if we know our customers really well and our product and all that. So one thing I wanted to ask you, Joel, obviously you weren't a product VP forever. You had to make that jump at some point in your career. What's the biggest thing that you sort of learned as you went to that level of
Yeah.
you're in the executive team meetings, you're sometimes maybe reporting to a board or making at least an update to a board. That's how so many people, so many listeners of ours start, is just they get a few chances here and there and they get into it. What's the biggest learning that you had, and maybe just give a piece of advice to somebody looking to make that jump?
Yeah, that's a great question. What is the biggest learning that I've had when I made the leap into product, like VP of
Yeah.
product and higher? Um, I actually I want to answer the second part of the question first, because I think it indicates learnings that accumulated over time, and I can back it into like what was the first set of things. One of the challenges at the VP of product or chief product officer level that I think a lot of folks are going to run into, and maybe less so in a place where there's if we're talking 1,000, 2,005, or 10,000 employees or more, the larger organizations, this may not ring quite as true, but I do think there's still a semblance of value. But certainly in my experience, early stage companies, it's very tempting to come into a role and when we think about that product strategy, to actually envision the future of the product that you believe should happen. So this means you come in, whether you're a subject matter expert or not, you come in with a set of opinions, and one of the most important things as a product person in general is to learn how to use your opinions to inform analysis and inform understanding, but not actually as a prescription for what to go build, because your own experience is only going to ever be limited. It's not representative of all of the users out there that are going to need the thing that you're trying to build. So sure, like we come in with these opinions, we survey the landscape, and if you're doing the job well, you become incredibly expert in the product and its potential. You're hearing from users, customers all the time, and it's very tempting to go, okay, I know what we need to go build. But what is easy to forget is that you have an executive team you're working with, and B, most importantly, a CEO who may or may not be a founder of the company. Mm. And what happens is that I have found that it's that the CEOs and founders I've worked with, they have a very strong thesis. Like, why should this company exist? Where am I leading it? And the stronger your opinion personally about where to take something, the more risk you have if you're not tightly connected to your CEO, that you're askew just a little bit. All it takes is a 1 degree, 2 degree of separation. I mean, if you look 6, 12, 18 months down the road, suddenly you're building something that your ultimate leader here, your CEO, who also is reporting to the board and shaping a narrative there, doesn't align with or doesn't agree with. So there's a bit of humility that product leaders need to bring into the roles. We used to be told all the time, we're the CEO of the product. Be the Steve Jobs of building things. You come in and you're like, this is what everyone wants. This is what I'm going to go build. But that humility has to be, okay, but like I might have strong opinions, but they're loosely held. I can listen to my CEO. I can listen to where the board's putting pressure. I can identify signals from the market, and I can deconstruct my own opinions to produce what's right for the business. And I think that that's hard for a lot of product leaders, because you just, especially if you PM this thing and you grow in your role over time, it's like I know this. I've done this for years. I know exactly what we need to go do, and you have to set that aside. And I think that's really goes back to some of the earliest learnings I had, both when I first went into product, but also as I moved into higher levels of leadership, was just be hyper self-aware, what stakes you've planted in the ground and what lines you've drawn, because if you're not tightly tuned in. I mean, I have a biased point of view, but maybe more so than your CRO or CSO or your whatever other C-level execs or VPs that are there. If you're not tightly aligned with what your leader wants, then you're going to find dissatisfaction, anger, frustration, and ultimately a lack of success looking far enough down the road. So that I just can't emphasize enough that collaboration that has to occur between that person you're working with and for.
Yeah, that's huge. It does seem like it's a little bit difficult, I think, for new leaders to also navigate is creating that. You mentioned the CEO is creating the relationship with the CEO in the right way. It's a different relationship than maybe when you were director of product and somebody else was above you and that person interact with the CEO. You're really getting into the CEO's head and really figuring out where he or she wants to take the company is a big deal. Realizing that, understanding that, while at the same time helping to mold their mindset in the right
Hmm.
way. They may be looking for direction. They're not going to come out and be like, I need help, but
Right.
you have to kind of offer it in the most perfect, tactful way. It's just a strategic help. And it can make a world of a difference to you as a VP of product and how well you do in that company if you can influence the CEO in the right way. The other
Exactly.
thing I think is the multi-stakeholder management is such a big deal in those higher levels. Like you're dealing with so many different kinds of influential personalities and trying to get the head of sales, the head of marketing, the CEO, customer support leader, and like five other people to all point in the right direction is difficult for sure. And I've seen a lot of product leaders kind of fail because they'll work like one set of stakeholders become really aligned with them, but they'll just ignore this other group over here, and later on it'll come to bite them.
Hmm.
And then they're like, "Oh wait, I need to be continuously managing." All the stakeholders. It's like that movie Everywhere, Everything Everywhere All at Once or
Everywhere.
whatever.
Yeah.
That's like a product manager, VP of products life now is they got to be everywhere and doing everything. And it's like super difficult. I think some of the other functional leadership roles in an organization are not like that. But product certainly has always to me felt like that. Okay, a few more questions about this, your experience of becoming a VP of product and chief product officer and so forth. How has it changed as far as trying to build a solid relationship with the engineering side? Let's assume for a second we're talking about an organization that has a separate engineering and product function. Maybe one doesn't report to the other. Maybe they're both
Mhm.
independently reporting to the CEO. How do you build and maintain a solid relationship with engineering, in your opinion?
So, in my current role, I lead both, so it's less relevant here. Although I do think there's takeaways that represent how I work, how I have historically worked across the say across the aisle, but really engineers are our like next to there's a seat next to us on the plane, right? Not over across the aisle. So a couple of things. Number one is I never, ever, ever in my career do I have I or would I blame engineers for problems that we've run into. And it's not that when we retrospect on a challenge that's come up or a problem, or maybe we had an incident on the site, there's a bug that got through. Certainly, individually, we all bear some like responsibility. We care about quality and process efficiency. We have to caretake all of these things. But at the end of the day, an effective relationship starts with making sure your engineers know that you've got their back. You're going to think through the edge cases, you're going to think through the value proposition. You're going to communicate that to them. And then when questions are coming, like, and I've seen this before, are the engineers working hard enough? Are they doing enough? Are they building enough? Are they innovating enough? Placing it squarely on, well, this is product's responsibility. This is what
Mm,
product management is. It's making the decisions so that our engineers can apply their skill set directly onto the systems, the infrastructure, the architecture, and ultimately the code that they're laying down. That's number one.
mm.
Number two, so I told you I'm going to get a for a three for it here somewhere. Number two is uh, most talented engineers, maybe all talented engineers, all most engineers I've worked with, um, they're more than an order taker. They want to not just understand the context of the work they're doing, but they want to be participant in that. That doesn't mean that they want to sit through a dozen meetings with customers to try to understand the problem that's coming up, or they want to go into negotiation with customer success. I think there's a trust that that can be done elsewhere. But when you bring a problem to an engineer rather than a solution, and you really engage them in a thoughtful conversation, it might take a half hour of their time that they might be otherwise laying down code, but it might save days, hours, days, weeks, and even months getting to something that actually solves the problem in a meaningful way. So
Hmm.
I think involving engineers in the solutioning, presenting problems, and not just expecting them to take designs and a PRD and just like go do the thing is really critical. Okay, and then the third thing goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's even as chief product officer or chief product technology officer, it's even my designer, like everyone on the team that's not an engineer has to be able to solve problems that help engineers help save their time and keep them focused.
Mm.
So it's ways when I started doing this, in the early 2010s, it was really hard to do that. I could run queries, I could answer data questions, I could understand what's happening in the system and where, I could make sure I'm leaning in on testing in a development environment or in a staging environment, making sure we're getting the right things out. Like I could do all those things, but it's really been the last few years. I think it's truly transformed the way the product partners to engineering can go and provide value and help keep engineers focused so that those CS, customer success emergencies that come up, those really major pain points that might take weeks or months to solve, depending on how you deploy and how complex the problem is. If you can spend half a day jamming on a workaround that doesn't require your engineers to put a lot of effort into it, maybe they advise and make sure you're doing something appropriate. Like these kinds of things just make a massive difference in the trust that you can build with the team, that you are helping them be involved. You're providing them cover. Yeah, they're part of this.
Hmm.
They're part of the solution making, and ultimately they can stay focused on building the most valuable thing. Like this, these are things that I think create really positive relationships overall.
Hmm. Those are all great points. I'll add that I think some of the best product leaders I've seen do one simple thing right with the relationship with engineering, which is they're very organized. They're good planners. They're not perfect
Mm-hmm.
planners, but they're just very organized, and they don't catch engineering by too many surprises. Like every quarter, there'll be a couple of things that are surprising, but
Yeah.
in general, they're not ruining the engineering team's own plans by last minute things, just because they're very organized. And it doesn't take that much to have that good relationship with engineering. I think that's one of the things that's like, make sure not to throw them for a loop at the last minute. Make
Mhm.
sure to communicate with them frequently. I do find that it takes like way more to communicate with engineering. Sometimes you have to repeat things over and over. So if you can have patience and do that, things work better. Yeah, your points are also well taken. I think if you have a good relationship between engineering and product, it can be pretty amazing. You can build some great things. Okay, let's turn our gaze over to ed tech and the world of technology and education here in the US. I've loved that industry for a long time. Big question for you, Joel, is where do you think some of the biggest impacts of AI happen in education in the next, maybe let's call it 3 years? How does AI start to change education? How has it already started changing education in your mind? What are your thoughts on that?
I can the early to mid 2010s. I was at a learning management system company, ultimately acquired by the one that you and I both worked at together. And we were doing what a lot of companies were doing in our industry, which is promising this idea of personalized learning for every student.
Mm.
And what's fascinating is there's a sense then, and certainly upon reflection now, I think what we were doing was we're just really just putting a marketing sheen on top of what really wasn't anything about personalization.
Mm.
It wasn't really solving the problem, and frankly, it was a little bit of a lack of recognition that teachers had been doing this for 100 years. well,
Right.
forever,
Mm,
understanding what an individual student needs and how to deliver that to them. We're
that's
on
true.
the cusp of truly spectacular personalization in ways that we couldn't have imagined 10 years ago. And I don't just mean this idea of adaptive pathways. We often talk about how do we ensure that what a student is given is just the exact thing that they need. But AI and the generative nature of it, as it improves seemingly daily, if not hourly, gives us a view into a world where we can keep fidelity to the academic standards and the learning outcomes that we expect for every student in a course or a subject area, but can marry that with real-time generated media and content that makes that course come alive for that student. So now we can
Hmm.
navigate them through a course at a level that's incredibly personal and built for them and what they
Yeah.
need, and connect it to their passions and interests. One small example is we're now experimenting with generating songs that help students remember key concepts that are built in a genre or a music type specific to them. Not something that we built once and we're offering it to a subset of students that expressed interest in one musical style, but literally a song built for them.
That's really cool.
We couldn't have imagined doing that 5 years ago, even a
No.
couple of years ago, right?
Yeah.
And we have the ability to do that, and that technology is only going to get better. So I think
That's
that's
awesome.
one big area, and then the other is our teachers are just they're over. We know the storyline, right? They're overburdened, they're underpaid.
Hmm.
The administrative layer to their work is significant, and so how can we help them guide a student along a learning journey or work within the community, that community they have within the school or the parent and the
Hmm.
broader community, and just simplify their lives, just give them some of the
Yeah.
efficiencies that we're all experiencing in our day-to-day work already. That's been a pretty underserved area, even though a lot of people paid lip service to it. And I think there's some transformation coming there.
That's such a cool thought. That idea that you guys had about the different music genres. I was part of a company where way back in the day, I'm dating myself here totally, but like we were like the maybe second, maybe even first scholarship search engines on the web back in the day.
Mhm.
And it took so long for schools in those days to understand the power of like online systems and what it can do. But then when they started getting the hang of it, of course, like they started using it everywhere. Maybe something similar with AI is slowly starting to happen. If we can 10x a teacher's abilities, how incredible is that? That's just mind blowing. Um, I tend to agree with you that like I think AI is very impactful for sure, and anybody who doesn't think it is in ed tech, I think kind of has their head buried in the sand. This stuff is incredible. I've seen some. I was actually talking to. I'm on the board of an ed tech firm where they are doing some similar stuff, where they're building some tools to help kids get into college and find funding and all that stuff. And the just the matches between the student's profile and the schools, your reach target safety, and then figuring out which funding options are best for you. It's like light years better with when something even 3-4 years ago, and it wasn't requiring a lot of proprietary code or something. It was like OpenAI plus a few other things cobbled together, but just the power of it is massive. Do you think that like the pace at which um, if you look at like the innovation speed on AI in the world generally, it's going berserk right now. Every week, like new releases and new technology capabilities come out. Then there's the AI adoption side of things, which is happening at a different velocity, and it's like a lot of the firms I talk to, they're kind of slow to adopt AI. They're worried about regulatory concerns, or maybe the cost is a factor for them. Do you see AI adoption taking a while in education? It's certainly not going to match the innovation speed in the broader world, but or is this the kind of lightning in a bottle situation happening here with AI that every school district, everybody's going to be wanting this? It's going to have a huge impact on learners. Teachers' lives will be revolutionized. Like, what do you think about the adoption rate in of AI in education?
Well, I think the adoption rate is significantly skewed based on what the implementation looks like. So if we're talking
Mm,
about, I mean, at the most simple level, if we're saying our teacher is going to be using chatbots to optimize parts of what they do or whatever, maybe, maybe not, right? I mean, I think there's certainly early adopters. They're already doing this. They're going to ChatGPT. They're going to whatever solution they like, and they're asking questions and getting help. They're seeing the benefits of things like deep research or
mm,
the thinking models, producing better and better content information every single day. But there's a lot of people that there are a lot of people in education specifically that still have barely used these tools. I was literally just 3 days ago at a regional conference in a state, and a question was asked of the audience. This was an AI summit, about
mm,
75 district leaders there. And it was asked, how many of you have used one of these chatbots in the last
mm,
week or two or last month? And a significant proportion of the audience didn't raise their hand. They
mm.
hadn't done that at all.
Wow.
So that's an example of where AI's impact is going to be highly, pretty turbulent and based on a variety of very kind of surface level decisions. Not surface level, that's a bad way of saying it, but just decisions around, is it appropriate? What are the compliance requirements? These things we do care about, but some people are just going to take a straight path through it. Where I think it has a bigger impact, and what's worth talking about is, I'll just give a quick example. About a year and a half ago, I was contemplating how we take our curriculum and we make it available in other languages. Now, translation services have been around forever. And the ability to automatically dub content, not even have to bring a voiceover actor in to dub over videos, certainly had been around. We were starting to see a year and a half to 2 years ago, some of the technology emerged that allowed for at least a natural sounding voice
All
to
right.
be applied to these courses. But
Mm-hmm.
really, what I was doing was imagining that now that that was the case, there had to be a world, and it was coming fast, where that voice could be trained on the voice of the people in the video. And the video itself, as we were seeing the earliest diffusion models or video models from AI,
Right.
could lip dub the content to whatever the voice was saying. And
Mm-hmm.
so this was my own personal thing as I spent my nights and weekends figuring out what were some of the early tools that allowed this. And by the time we had built a workflow around it, the tools had fully caught up, were usable in a normal business workflow. And we
Mm.
were able to go, and we've now translated our entire course library into four other languages, and we have the
That's
ability to do
cool.
any of 100 other languages. Yeah, this is for kids who struggle to access academic concepts and topics. Now they get to watch videos where the voice sounds natural, the
That's
lips
amazing.
match it. It looks like they're speaking that language, and that's an example of where AI is accelerating innovation. And
Yeah.
we don't have to get into the grappling of what's the adoption cycle, because what we can do is just go solve a real problem, which is schools all over the country with refugees and immigrants coming in, not being able to
Mm-hmm.
service them. Now they have a tool to go do so. So I think that's
Mm.
the other path that's worth looking at is, while the direct consumer or direct user interface of something like a chat GPT may have a staggered rollout, some industries will adopt quicker. It's these vertical integrated workflows that can now solve meaningful problems way faster and way better than ever before, that are just going to
Yeah.
become new products and new features that people don't even know are being driven by AI.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good example. And it reminds me actually of this conversation I was happening. I wonder what you think about this. I had this conversation with this investor years ago. This is like 5, 6 years ago. And he was like, Bobby, we don't invest that much in ed tech. And I was like, why? What's your rationale? And he's like, look, I mean, the biggest thing that's come out of ed tech in years and years, the best company has been Clever, and that's because they found one like administrative problem and just went crazy on it and solved it. The problem of single sign-on, or the problem of just, and said another way of like in the education space of the people forgetting their passwords and not knowing their credentials. And Clever just said, "Yep, we're just going to solve that one problem." And obviously, the rest is history in terms of how successful that company has been. I don't know if I shared that investor's thesis or viewpoint that that's the only Clever is the only company, but it's an interesting insight or perspective on how investors think about the edtech space and what the upside is for them to put money into AI edtech startups.
Mhm.
What do you see as the outlook for AI companies in the education space? Because it's such an obvious AI is such a clear and obvious technology that could help so many aspects of not just like how to help kids learn better, but 1,000 different things, including making the administrative lives of teachers easier. And so, do you think that we're going to get $1 billion unicorn in ed tech because of AI, or do you feel like no, that's still too difficult? It's the market is the way the ed tech world works. Maybe the buying cycles are long and complicated. Like, what do you think about that? The next big unicorn happening in ed tech.
So I think there's a small bit of nuance that anyone listening who's deeply involved in AI right now and in the architecture and how it's unfolding might resonate with. And I'll actually kind of talk about a different industry for a moment. There's a lot of talk right now about Harvey AI in the legal space. And if you go and follow what they're doing, there's kind of like two components to what they offer. And I see that emerging in EdTech as well. One component, essentially, this isn't exactly right, but essentially provides these simple, we'll call them wrappers, because that's often how they're referred to these days, but they're the simple kind of like front end to something that might feel slightly complex to an end user who's not yet fully sophisticated. And in our space, that could be creating a front end that makes it easier to write a weekly newsletter to parents. It's a time-consuming thing for teachers, but now they can just add a few documents, they can give it a few bullet points, and it can construct a really nice newsletter. But you could do that with any of the LLM tools out there right now. There's nothing stopping you from doing the exact same thing. We talk a little bit about, well, there's fine tuning or there's retrieval augmented generation. There are like these other things that can add there's like some value add, but for the most part, those are simple. When we think about that vertically integrated system, we think about the role of things like agents, the ability to have specialized LLMs working in concert to go solve a much broader problem. Because if you give one prompt in and you ask it to like go write a curriculum for an entire course, it's going to fail. It's going to be pretty bad. It's either going to be high level or it's just going to fail over time. But if you have specialist agents that have some degree of training, fine tuning, or access to documents, then you can start to see how the ability to create outsized value by solving a whole set of problems does two things. One is it tackles some of the biggest and most substantiated issues that our users are facing. But the second thing, and probably more importantly, is it creates a moat. It's a differentiation from everyone else. It would be very easy to go and create a company right now that does 100 wrappers for teachers to make it super easy for them to do their job. There's nothing stopping people. Now you're just talking about creating a marketing and sales engine around that and trying to like go after a piece of the pie. But what happens if OpenAI, if Microsoft, if Google decides to create an EDU version, an education version of their product, and they just build that in themselves? You don't really have a moat. But if you think about that end-to-end workflow, if we think about a time when curriculum development or assessment or whatever can be done, through a really sophisticated end-to-end solution, something that's a hard problem to tackle today, but there are companies that can go do that. Suddenly you have a whole different outlook on what's valuable and what can lead towards that unicorn status. So in that legal services field, Harvey AI is doing that. They're not just creating some simple wrappers. They're actually creating things that can create an S9 from scratch. You just give it the documents and now it can produce a document that can pass muster with investors and with legal and all of that. And that's a really hard problem to solve that someone else isn't going to easily do that soon. So I think we have the opportunity to do that. There are enough problem spaces in education. It's just someone going and getting that done that's going to be the value.
Yeah. That's such a good example of the Harvey AI thing. My take is like I think in every industry is probably going to have some AI based unicorn type for that industry. I don't know if it's always going to be the exact definition of Silicon Valley unicorn, but it'll be some explosive growth company is going to happen in almost every industry. I think with AI, it'll be super cool to see which company it is and what they do in ed tech, um, because of just how difficult America's education system has gotten, and how much more effective it could be if you deploy some of these technologies. Now, I'm a technologist myself, so I get super excited about it. But of course, it's not just about technology. I mean, it's all about the kids and the teachers and all that. But empowering them seems like a very doable thing. 10xing the impact and effectiveness of a teacher with AI seems like a doable thing.
Mhm.
Making a kid learn 10 times better is a doable thing. You gave the example
Mhm.
of like five different musical genres. Oh my God. Like, and the thing that about it is so fascinating is that companies can produce those kinds of products in almost no time compared to
Mhm.
how it was pre AI. So the
Mhm.
speed at which these innovations are now happening are definitely it is definitely just going up, and I think that
Mhm.
bodes well for the education space.
Yeah.
Here's the last one. This wouldn't be a Technocratic podcast without a somewhat controversial question. I had
Great.
this debate with all my colleagues and friends in product and tech. Um, is product and engineering both taken together, let's say, is AI and LLMs that have been built now, are those the beginning of this field going away over 4, 5, 6, 7 years because of the technology? Where okay, now you can have a business person just talk to an LLM and tell it what it wants. You don't need engineers, you don't need product people, you don't need any of that stuff. Are you a believer in that, or do you think no, product engineering is still a thing until maybe we have AGI and then everybody's roles are questioning, including the CEO?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think on a 5-year timeline, no, we need product engineering. We need it for a couple of different reasons. I feel very strongly about this. The first is that for the next couple of years, the magic of AI is going to come out from people who understand a problem space, and so call that product, understanding a problem space, and are able to differentiate or innovate in the technical solutioning that emerges from AI. If an engineer isn't, I mean, arguably, if they're not leveraging AI in coding, they're missing the bus on that. Choose your IDE of choice. Make sure you know that you got the right plugins there. Demand that you have access, an API key for one of the LLMs that you find best at coding. I have my personal opinions on this. Go do those things, and recognize that your ability to think through hard, intractable problems and to deploy solutions effectively is still going to be really valued. Yeah, we
Mm-hmm,
see all the social media around people that use Windsurf or Bolt or
mm-hmm,
V0 from Vercel and like
mm-hmm,
make these cool apps. But I haven't seen anything yet that gives me a fear that, like, generally speaking, this discipline is going to go away. Now,
mm-hmm,
does that mean that we're going to see the same roles that are offered or the same skills within those roles? Absolutely not. I think there's a huge shift that's already occurring. It's changed how I hire. It's changed who I hire. It's changed the
mm-hmm,
expectations I have. It's changed the velocity with which I think change should be happening, even once a new person is onboarded. So all of those things have evolved and changed and will continue to do so over the next couple of years. But I don't think on a 5-year timeline, there's a fundamental elimination occurring.
mm-hmm.
Beyond 5 years, it's tough to say. I think we're going to find new jobs emerge
Yeah.
for those that are most connected and talented and working on this space.
Yeah, I always give this example. I think you're spot on. I think I always give this example where back in the day there was a role called webmaster. You remember that? We're probably in a
Mm-hmm.
similar generation. Like
Yeah,
that
heck
role,
yeah.
that role completely disappeared, and
Mm-hmm.
I think some roles now will for sure disappear because of AI. New roles will come on. I think it has changed how you hire. Now, to me, it seems a little bit. crazy if, frankly, if even a VP of product or engineering is not using AI in their personal workflows. If they've
Hmm.
never used ChatGPT, that seems unusual now already, to
Yeah.
just 2 years into this thing or whatever.
Yep.
Okay, I think we're at the end of our time. It was a pleasure talking with you today, Joel. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Bobby, for having me. It was a delight, and look forward to more in the future.
I'm sure our listeners will have taken a lot from your insights. And so thank you to our audience for tuning in. You can catch all the rest of our podcasts at www.technocratic.io. In the meantime, keep the sharks swimming, and I'll see you next week.